Hey gang, welcome back to Joe Daddy's Garage. Today's video, well, it's part 3 in the 56 Chevy gasser project. Now I did an introduction video on this car and what I plan to do, and then I was in the second video trying to get things ready so I could cut the front end off, and I ran into some problems. And as I showed in the other video, the frame unit that was sent to me was damaged at some point, whether it was in shipping or whatever. It was out of square. And so the company that made the frame unit and all that, they asked that we ship everything back to them, which we did. They verified that it was definitely out of square, that there was something wrong, and they corrected it. So I have a new setup right here. Now, I don't know exactly if they had taken the one that we had originally and cut it apart, but I tend to think this may be a whole new front frame snouts or whatever piece you want to call that. So we'll take a look at that, and then I've gotten some more information on ideas that I'm going to incorporate into this project, and part of that is reinforcement and different ideas as to how you do some measuring and reinforcement for let's say separation of the frame rails, because when you have the two frame rails coming to the front of the car and you're going to cut those off, you could have a problem where they move. So I'm going to put a bar between those two and use that to hold the frame rails in place, but also use that as a reference for a forward measurement so that I know exactly where the core support would line up based on the design. So let's take a look at the replacement front snout piece. So here it is. It's sitting on the pallet. We've already unwrapped it, cut it loose from all that. I was looking it over, and this is why I think that this is a whole nother unit, because the other one I had cut off this pipe that is a support structure for shipping, and when I did that, I remember how I had cut it and how it was welded, and this looks different. So it doesn't look like they ground off any of the old weld like I would have expected. It looks like this is a whole new setup. So that's good. That should be good. Now we've already done some basic measuring. We did another crisscross with it on the pallet, and it's really close to being dead on. Not enough to be concerned about. So again, what I will do at this point is I'm going to unbolt the shocks, unbolt the springs, remove the axle, set it aside, and then work with the frame or snout assembly, however you want to call that, and then start incorporating some of the measurements from that into the front of the car. Okay, with the front axle removed, I can take another look at the frame rails. Now, I've measured these, but I want to show you that the straight up measurement is around 44 what does that say? A little over a little over 44 1/4. Okay. Same thing over here. A little over 44 1/4. Now I want to do the cross measuring that I did before. So I'm coming into that area right there, and I'm about 52 and like almost 15/16. So this way, and again there can be a little variation in the floor, but I have that one on, and really it's pretty much the same measurement. So I'm much happier with this, and again I thank Checkered Racing for stepping up and taking care of the problem. Now I contacted them and let them know that we got it and everything, and I have some other things, some other information that I want to relate. Whenever this assembly, when you're looking at putting this together, everything is based off of the center line of the axle, and they talk about taking measurements from the front edge of the door to the center line of your existing axle, and then making this line up with the new piece in what's left of your frame rails after you cut them off. And I got to thinking, if you're doing this by yourself, if you had all of this bolted together again, that is a very heavy unit to try to handle. So what I wanted to do was come up with a way that I could just use that piece. So after talking to them, they mentioned that these leaf springs are 26 inches basically, eye bolt center to eye bolt center, however you want to look at that, or end to end. And they said what they do is they measure from the center of the rear mount point, come forward 13 inches. And that is the center line for their axle. So what I plan to do is I'll use that same measurement, center line, 13, measure 13 over there, and then my thoughts are I'll take a piece of 1-inch square tubing and put it on that line, and I can either tack weld it or clamp it, and then when it comes time to measure, I can still measure off the front edge of the door and just come forward to the square tubing, and that way I've got the same measurement all the way around, and that will help index this fore and aft. Okay, so I'll show all that as I move along, but before I even get to that point, there's some other things that I need to do. Obviously I'm going to have to get measurements and figure out where I want to cut the frame. So I'm going to remove the steering box, the tie rods, the drag link, and the idler arm, and get those out of the way so that when it does come time, I can cut things loose. I also want to point out the owner has provided me now with some Chevy big block solid mounts, and these are Moroso mounts. I had these on my 55 Chevy, and basically that's what these are designed to do. They're made to mount directly to this post, and I had them get some grade 8 bolts, so we're set to go on those. That'll give me help me get everything in location. So what I want to do again is I'll remove these other pieces and then do some measuring, make sure everything is where it needs to be. So I wanted to show you this again. This is the Bauer laser level, crosshair laser level that I bought from Harbor Freight. And when I did this the last time, I had the laser shooting across, and I was leveling the bottom of the frame to the laser beam. And after talking with some people and thinking it over, I realized that may not have been the best choice, because this car could have been jacked up at different times and had the frame maybe pushed a little. But also, by doing it that way, I can't see the line on the other frame rail. So what I can do in this case is I can now take a measurement, and I set it up as 5 inches, and I'm measuring from the top of the frame, just in case this had ever been pushed around or anything, with a jack. And so with the 5-inch mark, I can go to the other side, hang the tape in the same locations or anywhere along that the frame itself, and as long as I have 5 inches, I know that it is level front to rear on both sides. So hope that helps. Now in the previous video I also identified that I measured front to rear. I had the laser set up, and I put tape down indexing to the center line of the rear axle and the center line of the front rotors. In the instructions, it talks about measuring from the front edge of the door to the center line of your rotor. And I was trying to do that, and I realized when I'm measuring the door, which is a great reference point, it's not square. In other words, if you were to look down the body of the car and then come out here, you're out in kind of empty space between this gap. And not that that's a huge concern, but what I decided was I have this mount point for the front fender right there, and I come forward and I can get a measurement of 28 and in this case 3/16. So I wrote that down on this side, and now it can be different from side to side because the body may not be totally square on the car, and that's why they want you to take the measurements from basically known locations. So there it is on this side, and this one is right at 28 and 5/16. So that's what I've written on this side. Again, this is in relation to how the body is sitting on the frame. So it could be just a little bit off, which will change those measurements. So with those in place, I can now be more comfortable with separating the steering box and all that, because without the drag link, each one will turn individually, you know what I mean? And it could be off slightly, but that's where I'm at. I'm going to take that apart. One more thing. You may also remember from the previous video that I was using this mount point for the core support to determine level. Again, this could be slightly off because it's an attached piece. What I did is I took a piece of 1/8 square tubing and I set it up on top of the frame rails up against the control arms, and that is much more accurate. This one is just a little bit to the left, which is not a big deal, but this one is almost dead center, so I trust this a lot more. Now I know by looking at the level, of course, coming underneath the car, that it technically levels it this way as well as this way. At least that's what my mind tells me. So very happy with that. Now what I want to do is add a cross brace inside of the two frame rails to keep them from possibly pulling apart and moving around. So I'm going to use some 1/8 square tubing, this Evolution chop saw that I have, and cut off a piece at about 29.5 inches. And that's pretty close to where I want it to be within the frame rails. They kind of push together slightly, so you can kind of adjust it to whatever may suit you. I'm going between the two body mounts on either side. So that's my location I'm going to use. So there you have the idea. It's going to go straight across, and I need to clean up some metal so that it can weld. And of course I want to make this as square as I possibly can, because I want to use it as a reference point when I come to the front for the core support location. So I'm going to have to do some measuring in here and adjust it to where it's nice and square. I'm within a 32nd of an inch. So I think I'm going to leave it where it's at. Now, the idea being, once I have that as square as I need it, right, I can take a measurement from here and come forward to the core support mount. So that'll give me a drop measurement as well. I can go to the center line of that, and now I have a reference point. So I want to give you some insight as to my train of thought on this process. We all know that there's no real pictures with the instructions. I get the gist of it. I understand the concept of what they want done, but I'm trying to show ways that you could do this if you were trying to do this at home. Now, you already know I've welded in that piece of 1/8 square tubing back there. It is square to the transmission mount, the original bell housing mount for the car, and it's also level with the car. Also, I took a piece of 1/8 square tubing and set it up here and made sure my level was still good. So I already know the frame is level, or as level as I'm going to get it. So what I plan to do, I'll get this out of the way. Okay, so the idea now is I have a reference point that is locked into the car, or into the frame. Up here, I have a piece of 2x2 angle iron. I have it with the straight edge coming up and the flange coming forward, and I am centered on the holes for the core support. So that gives me a known location. Now I can take the tape measure and draw from that piece of square tubing and get a measurement to the center line for the core support. In this case, it comes out to 33 1/4. Now the other part of that, because I'm using the angle iron on the top face of the mount, I can use that as a drop measurement. And in my case, it's dead on 19. So now I have two known locations. I've got basically a length, and I've got a height. The rest of it is going to come into play. The frame rails, now that that piece is in there, they can't move left and right. And what I need to do is figure out where I want to cut the frame off. So let me show you what the idea is with that. Now what the instructions tell you to do is measure from the front of the rail basically to this block, this piece that creates the part that's going to go into the frame rails. So if I come from the front and measure back to this block, it's about 42 1/4. Now I had a conversation with Jason at Checkered Racing, and he suggested that I cut the frame long. So I don't want to cut it right at 42 1/4, because his suggestion was you leave it long enough that you can bend it in and weld to this section up here. So that's my plan, is I'm going to make it, I don't know what I'll do. I may make it, instead of 42 1/4, I may make it 40 1/4, somewhere in that range, so I have some material that I can bend over. Now the hard part is measuring that on the frame with all the suspension in place. Let me show you. So if I take the tape measure now, again, all the suspension's in the way, and I have to come through the coil spring and get up to what is the front edge of the frame rail, which in this case is a little bit out of shape as well, and come back here. If I'm looking at 42 1/4, that's right about here, and that's just a ballpark number. Sorry, 42 1/4 is right about there. So what I plan to do, because I don't want to cut it, I want to cut it long, but I have these mount holes for the idler arm. So I'm going to cut in right behind those mount holes because they're indented in, and that's going to cause a problem. So I'm going to cut right behind those mount holes, and I'll do the same thing on the other side so that I have the same length of the frame rail up here. Another idea that I've come up with is I'm going to use my car ramps, and I have some 2x8s sitting on top of those, and that's going to be my catch for this front suspension. Now it's going to be slightly nose heavy, so I will take my jack stands, set them out here so that it can hit those, but I just have a little bit of space underneath these contact points about the width of a finger. So if this drops like it should, I should be able to make this whole thing go forward. Part of the idea of doing that is to protect my tape lines that I have on the floor, because if this were to fall and mess those up, that might be a problem. So I'm going to cut this off and work it out that way. So here's what I've come up with. I was able to measure and get to about 42 1/4. I used a level to make a straight line, and then I came forward basically the width of the level. So you can see I have a line there. It's going to come through the center of this hole. That may mean that I have to cut this out, which is fine. I'll modify whatever I have to, but that'll give me that. And then I measured also just to verify from this bracket to this line was 3 5/8, and I did the same measuring over there, and I verified 3 5/8 as well. So should be ready to go. There's an internal plate hanging on inside on both sides. So I guess I'll have to cut an opening so I can cut that plate inside. I'm not sure what that's there for, but it's got to go. Well, there it is. It's a little bit shorter now than what it was. I will point out that I had anticipated this a little bit, but I should have planned a little further ahead. Whenever I actually got to separate, you probably saw the car came up just a little. I did have the jack up front, and when I was cutting it loose, I noticed that it started to lift a little, or when I lifted on the suspension, it was like, hey, this comes up pretty easy. I wasn't expecting that to be that big a deal, because really that front end, I can pick up one side and put it on the dollies by myself, and it probably weighs a couple 100 pounds, I guess, but I was not expecting it to be that much of a movement. So if you're doing one of these, have a jack in the back, or maybe even move your jack stands back further. Now, I was limited where I put these. In my opinion, I have them right in front of the shackle mounts for the leaf springs, but putting a jack underneath the back, put some weight on those springs. It's not going to change the angle because the jack stands are going to keep it where it belongs. So it didn't move, it didn't shift or anything, so it's fine. But what I've noticed, of course, is this is one of the pieces that was inside, and it had this tab welded on it, and I cut it off, and that was to support the channel in between where the bolts go. And so they probably have, there's a little piece of whatever, let's look at this one. Yeah, so when they build these, they have this plate with this loop basically, and it's welded to the side so that it supports where the bolts go for the steering box and stuff. So I'll have to cut these out, get that out of the way, clean up these edges. I am pretty happy that I got what I consider a pretty straight cut overall, considering it was freehand. So I'm happy with that. And there will be some more trimming. I may have to remove this indent. I don't know yet. But I'm happy with where it's at. Now on to trying to get that in place, and obviously doing the measuring and all that sort of thing, but I'll have to clean up these openings before I do much else. Well, that looks a lot different. As I'm looking this over, I'm trying to take some consistent measurements, of course, and one thing I noticed, the block that they have on this is right at 2 3/4 inch, and this width internally down at the bottom it's almost 2 3/4, but at the top it's like 2 1/2. So that's why they're talking about splitting these open, and they sent me some pictures. Basically what they did, what they recommend, is splitting the corners, and that way you can bend pieces up and out of the way. Another thing I will do is eliminate this indent, because there's no way I'm going to be able to reform that. If I cut that out, if nothing else, I can use that as a weld surface, or I could put a piece in and still do a plug weld, but either way that has to go away. On the other side, same situation, 2 3/4, and down at the bottom it's about, in this case, well, 2 1/2. There's some slag on the side that's making it a little tighter than it really is, but around 2 1/2 to almost 3/4. And it gets so I'll do the same thing on this side. I'll split this open, but I'll have to remove the mount point for the clutch ball. That's going to have to move anyway because we're bringing the engine forward slightly, so that'll get relocated. And also this recess, I'm going to cut that out. Now the tape I left on there because that is where this corner basically should end up. It should be deep down in that pocket. And with this opening, even though it's a little big, again I could weld the perimeter and different things like that. So the other thing, I measured my center line here on the bolt hole and came forward, got my 13-inch mark. I did the same on the other side. So little things like that off the, just, I'm not going to show all the work. I'll clean this up and open this up and all that sort of thing. So that's where it's at right now. Okay, I think that's enough for this video. I wanted to get the front section cut off, and I used information that I got from Checkered Racing and some other input from other people, and I accomplished that goal. Now the plan, of course, is to show you how you can do this by yourself. Now it would be great to have multiple people and have all kinds of stuff that you could do this with, but I'm doing it with basic tools. The ramps work good. That whole plan worked. It slid right off like I wanted it to. The only caution I want to really emphasize is make sure you have something under the back of the car. It did tilt slightly, as I mentioned, and I saw it do that, and I kind of thought about it, you know, in hindsight, hindsight's 20/20. I should have had something back there to begin with. I had the jack up front. But I recognized it started to move. I said, okay, hold on, let me take care of that. I did talk this over, a lot of this information, with Roger next door. And he's great for helping me troubleshoot ideas and processes. So, you know, there's a lot of things that I do that maybe other people don't do, or they just take it for granted that you might already know this sort of thing. And by bouncing those ideas off of Roger and getting input and helping to resolve any of these small issues, it really helps me out a lot. So I want to thank him for him, you know, interacting with me and helping me resolve some of that. But there's a lot more to do, and I will have to, as I mentioned, separate the frame rails, open them up, and remove the ball mount for the clutch. And I don't want to rush all that. I don't want to push all that into one condensed video. I want to show you as much detail as I can. So there will be another video. I think this was part 3, so that'll be part 4 of actually fitting that piece in and massaging everything together and getting the welds in place. And of course, I will continue to do measurement after measurement after measurement to make sure that everything lines up. So that'll be the end of this video. Like I said, if you would, leave a comment, leave a thumbs up, let me know what you think about this video, and until next time, take care of yourselves. See ya.